Some moments seem insignificant when they happen. Just another Monday. Just another conversation. Just another night alone. But looking back, I realized that was the moment everything changed. Before we get into it, make sure to subscribe for more real-life stories like this, stories that make you question what you do in the same situation. It began with dinner. A simple, ordinary dinner. The kind we'd had 1,000 times before, me standing at the stove, stirring a pot of pasta sauce, Ethan unwinding from work. The smell of garlic and simmering tomatoes filling the kitchen. I didn't know it yet, but this would be the last normal night for a long time. He sat down at the table, rolling up the sleeves of his dress shirt, his tie already loosened. He looked tired, but not just tired. Distracted, preoccupied. And then he said it. "They're sending me to London for a week." The words landed between us like a stone in a still pond. I paused, wooden spoon hovering over the pot. "What?" "Yeah," he said, reaching for his glass of water like he hadn't just completely derailed my evening. "Some last-minute business meetings. I leave tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning? A whole week? Alone? I forced a smile. "That's sudden." Ethan shrugged, swirling the water in his glass. "Yeah, but it's important. I'll check in every night, okay?" He said it so casually, as if he were reassuring me about some minor inconvenience. But I wasn't worried, not exactly. It was something else. Something I couldn't quite name yet. I nodded, turning back to the stove. Stirring too aggressively. The sauce splattered onto the stovetop, tiny red droplets against white enamel. I wiped them away, but the unease stayed. We ate dinner as usual. We talked about his trip. About how busy he'd be, about how this was good for his career. I nodded, asked the right questions, smiled at the right moments. But I was somewhere else entirely. That night, he packed while I watched from the bed. His suitcase lay open, half filled with neatly folded shirts and travel essentials. He double-checked his flight details, humming absently to himself. "You sure you're okay?" he asked, glancing up at me. "Yeah, I lied. Just tired." I wasn't tired. Something about this trip unsettled me, but I couldn't explain why. Ethan traveled all the time. It wasn't new, but this time it felt different. I turned off the lamp and slid under the covers, my back to him. His breathing slowed, evening out as he drifted off. I stayed awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each inhale and exhale. The next morning, he kissed my forehead, suitcase in hand. "I'll call you when I land," he said. I nodded. "Safe flight." And just like that, he was gone. At first, the solitude was welcome. Take long baths without someone knocking on the door for a charger they forgot to bring in. For the first 2 days, it was fine. Really, I buried myself in work. Left Netflix playing in the background, letting the familiar voices of sitcom reruns fill the quiet. Took long walks through the neighborhood, feeling the crisp autumn air against my skin. But by the third evening, something had changed. The house no longer felt like home. It felt empty. And that's when the doorbell rang. I hesitated. I wasn't expecting anyone. For a split second, I considered ignoring it. Maybe it was just a delivery mistake, or a neighbor needing something trivial. But something about the timing made me uneasy. I walked to the door slowly, my heartbeat suddenly too loud in the quiet house. The peephole was smudged, but even through the blur, I recognized the figure standing outside. Ryan, Ethan's best friend. My stomach flipped. He stood there like he always did, completely at ease, one hand tucked into his jeans pocket, the other holding a bottle of wine. He wasn't exactly smiling, but there was an unmistakable warmth in his expression, something effortless about the way he carried himself. For a brief second, I debated whether or not to open the door. Ryan and Ethan had been inseparable since college. In all the years I'd known them, Ryan had been a fixture in our lives: holidays, barbecues, spontaneous late-night outings. But we had never really spent time alone together. It was always the three of us or a larger group. Yet here he was. "Hey, Ellie," he greeted casually, his voice smooth, familiar. "Saw Ethan's out of town. Thought I'd check in on you." I should have questioned why he was here. I should have made an excuse, told him I was tired, that I had an early morning. But instead, I opened the door. "That's sweet of you," I said, stepping aside. "Come in." Inside, the house suddenly felt smaller. I led him into the living room, dimly lit by the soft glow of the lamp near the couch. The fireplace crackled faintly, casting flickering shadows on the walls. "You didn't have to come all this way," I said, watching as he set the bottle of wine down on the coffee table. "Didn't mind." He shrugged, pulling off his jacket and tossing it over the arm of the couch. "Figured you might be getting bored with Ethan gone." I huffed out a small laugh, more like enjoying the peace and quiet. Ryan smirked, raising an eyebrow. "I don't believe that for a second." He wasn't wrong. I had spent the last 3 nights drowning in the kind of silence that had stopped feeling peaceful. Without waiting for an invitation, Ryan picked up the bottle of wine and inspected the label. "You got glasses?" I hesitated again. A tiny fleeting moment of doubt. It wasn't weird that Ryan was here. It wasn't wrong to have a drink with him. So why did I suddenly feel like I was crossing an invisible line? Still, I found myself walking to the kitchen, pulling 2 glasses from the cabinet. Ryan had already made himself comfortable by the time I returned. He was sprawled on the couch, arm draped over the backrest, legs stretched out. There was something easy about the way he fit into the space, like he belonged there. I handed him a glass and he poured generously before handing it back. "To Ethan's big adventure," he said, raising his own. I let out a breathy laugh. "To Ethan's trip." We clinked glasses. And just like that, the tension I'd felt at the door faded. We talked. About work, mutual friends. The absurd office drama Ethan always complained about. The conversation flowed effortlessly, too easily. I laughed more than I had in days. I forgot, for a moment, about the strange weight I'd been carrying since Ethan left. And then, somewhere between the laughter and the refills, I realized something. I was enjoying this, more than I should. It hit me all at once, the weight of the moment settling over me like a slow-building storm. Ryan had always been charming, but I had never really noticed it before. Not like this. Not like the way he was looking at me now. His attention was undivided, his eyes lingering just a fraction too long. Not inappropriate, but different. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. And that was dangerous. Something shifted. The warmth of the wine buzzed in my veins, but I knew it wasn't just the wine. It was the way his voice lowered when he spoke. The way his lips curved into an almost smirk when I said something sarcastic. It was the casual, absent-minded way he rubbed his thumb over the rim of his glass. The way he stretched his arms behind his head. His shirt pulling just slightly across his chest. Things I shouldn't be noticing. I cleared my throat, breaking eye contact. I should probably call it a night soon. Ryan watched me for a second too long before nodding. "Yeah, don't want to keep you up." But he didn't make any immediate move to leave. And I didn't make any immediate move to stand. There was a moment, a pause, where neither of us spoke. A moment where something unspoken lingered between us, stretching the space between our bodies too thinly. And in that moment, I wondered, had he always looked at me like this? Had I just never noticed before? Or was something changing right now? A flicker of uncertainty passed through his expression, but it was gone before I could analyze it. He downed the rest of his wine, setting the glass down with a soft clink. "I should go," he finally said. I nodded. "Yeah." And still neither of us moved. Ryan was the first to break the stalemate. He pushed himself off the couch, grabbing his jacket. His movement slow, almost reluctant. At the door, he hesitated, glancing back at me. "Good night, Ellie," he said, voice softer than before. "Good night," I murmured. And then he was gone. The door clicked shut, and the silence returned. But it wasn't the same. It wasn't the comfortable solitude I had felt before. It was something else. Something heavier. Something that felt dangerously close to the edge of something I didn't want to name. The night ended without incident. At least that's what I kept telling myself. I had shut the door, heard the soft click of the lock, watched Ryan's silhouette disappear down the street. Everything was normal. Nothing had happened. And yet I barely slept. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind refused to quiet down. It replayed every moment from the evening before, the easy laughter, the casual conversation, the way he had looked at me. Not inappropriate. Not explicit. Just different. Like he saw something in me I wasn't sure I wanted him to see. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket tighter around me, but it didn't help. Guilt crept in at the edges, threading itself through my thoughts. Had I encouraged him? Had I lingered too long in the doorway? Had I let something unspoken pass between us, knowing full well where it could lead? I hadn't done anything wrong. But the fact that I was thinking about it this much told me I wasn't as sure as I wanted to be. The house felt too big that night. The silence pressed in on me. The sheets felt too cold and my skin tingled with a restlessness I couldn't shake. By morning, I told myself I was overreacting. It was nothing. But then, later that afternoon, my phone buzzed. I picked it up without thinking, my thumb already swiping across the screen. Ryan, had a great time last night. Hope I didn't overstay. I stared at the message too long. There was nothing inherently wrong with it. It was normal, friendly, and yet my heart beat a little faster. I should have let it sit. I should have left it unread. Instead, before I could overanalyze, my fingers moved on their own. Me, not at all. It was nice having company. The response came almost instantly. Ryan, glad to hear that. I was thinking of stopping by again tonight if you're free. No pressure, of course. I froze. There it was. The moment where I should have done the right thing. I should have said no. I should have made an excuse. Instead, my fingers betrayed me. Me sure. Tomorrow works. The second I hit send, my stomach twisted. Anticipation, guilt, excitement, all tangled together into something I wasn't ready to name. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. I tried to focus on work, on emails, on anything but the notification sitting in my phone. But my thoughts kept drifting. I replayed our conversation over and over. Had he expected me to say no? Was he testing me? And more importantly, why hadn't I said no? I paced the kitchen, fingers drumming against the countertop, heart racing for reasons I didn't want to admit. It was just Ryan. Just Ethan's best friend. Just a harmless visit. Then why did it feel like something was shifting? By the time the evening rolled around, I was restless. I kept glancing at my phone, rereading the messages like the words would somehow change if I stared at them long enough. Maybe I should cancel. Maybe I should say I had a headache, or that something had come up. But even as I thought about it, I knew I wouldn't. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, I wanted to see him again. And that terrified me. Lying in bed that night, I tried to convince myself everything was fine. I stared at my phone, thumb hovering over Ethan's name. I could call him, tell him I missed him, hear his voice, let it ground me. But I didn't. Instead, I locked my phone, turned it face down, and closed my eyes. Sleep didn't come easy, because I knew deep down, this was a line meant to be crossed. And I was already standing too close. The second visit was different. I knew it the moment I opened the door. Ryan stood there, hands in his pockets, his gaze lingering just a second too long. This wasn't like before. The air between us was charged, the weight of our last meeting still hanging over us like an unspoken confession. I should have sent him away. But I didn't. Instead, I stepped aside. And he walked in without hesitation. The living room felt smaller tonight. Ryan settled onto the couch like he had the first time. But something was off. He didn't crack a joke. Didn't make some teasing comment about my wine selection. He was quieter, more measured. I poured us both a glass anyway, handing him one without meeting his eyes. We talked at first. About his job. About some absurd argument he'd had with a coworker. About a new restaurant Ethan had been meaning to try when he got back. But it all felt forced. Like we were just waiting for the inevitable. The tension was there. Undeniable. Every glance, every movement, it all felt charged, like we were dancing on the edge of something dangerous. I knew what was happening. And I knew neither of us was stopping it. At some point, I stopped pretending to listen. I felt him watching me, his gaze burning into my skin. When I finally met his eyes, it was like the last barrier between us had shattered. I don't know who moved first. All I knew was that one moment we were sitting apart and the next we weren't. He was close. Too close. So close that I could smell the faint scent of his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his skin. His hand brushed against mine and I didn't pull away. Neither did he. A slow inhale. A hesitation. Then like a dam breaking. His lips were on mine. Soft at first. Testing. A question. I could have stopped it there. But I didn't. I answered him instead, my fingers curling into his shirt, pulling him closer, my breath catching as he pressed against me. The kiss deepened and suddenly there was no more hesitation. No more second-guessing. It was heat and urgency, his hands sliding along my arms up to my face, cradling me as if he had been waiting for this as long as I had. I should have stopped. But in that moment, stopping was the last thing I wanted. Because for the first time in a long time I wasn't thinking. I wasn't worrying about consequences, about guilt, about Ethan. I was just feeling. And it felt good. The world blurred around us. Hands tangled in hair. Lips ghosting over skin. A sharp breath. A soft gasp. His weight over me, pressing me into the couch. His fingers tracing lines along my jaw, down my neck, across my collarbone. I let myself fall into it. Into him. Until my phone rang. Loud. Obnoxious. A brutal reminder of reality. My entire body stiffened. Ryan froze too, his breath warm against my neck. The phone kept ringing, insistent, demanding. I reached for it, my hand shaking. Ethan. His name lit up the screen, cutting through the haze, slicing clean through whatever moment we had been lost in. I gasped, shoving Ryan away like I had been burned. He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Sitting up as if waking from a dream. I stared at my phone, my heart pounding violently in my chest. I couldn't answer. I couldn't. Not after what just happened. The call went to voicemail, leaving behind only an eerie silence. A silence that felt heavier than before. Ryan's voice was rough when he spoke. Ellie. I shook my head violently. No. My throat was tight. We can't. Something flickered across his face. Regret? Frustration? Or maybe like me, he was just scared. He leaned back, exhaling hard. I should go. I nodded, swallowing against the lump in my throat. But neither of us moved. The silence stretched between us, thick with everything we almost became. I wanted to say something. Anything. But what was there to say? That I was sorry? That I didn't mean for this to happen? That I didn't know how to stop wanting it? Ryan stood abruptly, grabbing his jacket. His expression was unreadable. His jaw clenched. At the door he paused. His eyes met mine one last time. For a moment I thought he might say something. But he didn't. He just left. The door clicked shut, and the silence that followed was deafening. I pressed my fingers to my lips as if trying to erase what had just happened. But the truth was I didn't want to erase it. That was the scariest part of all. I let out a shaky breath. Staring at my phone, at Ethan's missed call. I couldn't call him back. Not now. Not when I still felt Ryan's touch on my skin. Not when the guilt hadn't fully set in yet. Not when a part of me still ached for something I shouldn't want. I turned my phone face down, pressing my palms against my face. I had crossed the line, and there was no undoing it. The next morning, my phone rang. Ethan. I had been awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, reliving the night before like a fever dream I couldn't shake. My body still remembered the heat. The urgency, the way Ryan's touch had lingered on my skin long after he left. I knew I couldn't avoid Ethan forever. I took a deep breath and answered. Hey, I said, forcing my voice to sound normal. Hey, babe. His voice was warm, familiar. Safe. But then a pause. Tried calling you last night. A couple times, actually. Everything okay? My stomach clenched. I had been sitting in the dark. Heart still racing, staring at his name on my screen and not answering. I swallowed. Yeah, sorry. I must have fallen asleep early. Guess I was more tired than I thought. A small silence stretched between us. Then he chuckled softly. Figures. You always do that when I'm away. The relief that washed over me was instant and suffocating. He believed me. Or maybe he just wanted to believe me. I missed you, he said, voice softer now. I can't wait to come home. I closed my eyes. A part of me ached at those words. Not because I didn't love him. Not because I didn't want him to come home. But because I knew I wasn't the same woman he had left behind. For days I tried to bury it. To shove what had happened into the deepest, darkest corners of my mind. I kept myself busy, overworking, overcleaning, over anything to keep from thinking too much. I told myself it was just a mistake, just a moment of weakness, just a lapse in judgment. But the truth was it wasn't just anything. It had happened, and pretending otherwise wouldn't undo it. I should have known that Ryan wouldn't just disappear. That he wouldn't let this sit in silence. 3 days after that night, my phone buzzed. Ryan, can we talk? I stopped breathing for a second. My pulse jumped, my fingers tightening around the phone. I knew I shouldn't reply. I knew that answering would only drag me deeper into something I wasn't ready to face. But part of me wanted to. Because no matter how much I tried to erase him from my mind, I couldn't shake the way I had felt in his presence. Alive. I hovered over the keyboard, fingers trembling. Then, I took a deep breath and deleted the message. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like something inside me was breaking apart. The day Ethan came home, I stood in front of the mirror for a long time. I stared at myself, searching for something proof that I was still the same woman. But I wasn't. The person looking back at me was a stranger. I smoothed my hair, fixed my blouse, practiced a smile. I needed to be ready. Ready to lie. Ready to pretend. Ready to convince myself that nothing had changed. When the front door finally opened, I rushed into his arms. I held him too tightly, burying my face into his shoulder, inhaling the scent of his cologne like it could erase everything else. "Miss me that much, huh?" he teased, running a hand down my back. I laughed too quickly, too forced. Of course. I could feel his heartbeat against mine. Steady, certain, unlike my own, unlike everything else inside me. That night, as Ethan lay beside me, peacefully unaware, I stared at the ceiling once again. The silence felt different now. Not lonely, but haunted. I had stayed faithful. Yet, the truth between Ryan and me would never truly disappear. It would linger like a ghost. Unspoken, unacknowledged, but never ever forgotten. This isn't a story about physical betrayal. It's about the lines we dance on, the temptations we pretend don't exist, the moments that make us question everything we thought we knew about ourselves. Some boundaries are never crossed. But that doesn't mean they were never broken. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have entertained the thought? Or shut it down before it even began? Let me know in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe.